everybody. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon from wherever you are. Thank you for joining us today. I'm holding off for one more minute to let more people trickle in, but I see there's many already who've joined us. Welcome. So hello again, welcome. My name is Eskedar Gessesse from Resilient Cities Network. It's really a pleasure to introduce today's Cities on the Frontline session. The speaker session started back in 2020 in collaboration with World Bank City Resilience Program. And since then, we've really been lucky to bring inspiring voices from across regions, sectors, and backgrounds. In keeping with that momentum, we're excited to bring another very important topic to this platform on urban energy resilience and disaster risk reduction. So welcome again. Before we jump ahead, just to set a few ground rules, we're hoping to have an open conversation today, but we have many participants. So to make sure we're able to manage all of your questions, and we'll try to get to as many of them as possible, please include them in the Q&A box in the Zoom. And then we'll sift through them. We'll pose them to the panelists during the Q&A segment of the session. Please note that the session is being recorded, so then you'll be able to find the video and all materials on our website afterwards. Today, we're joined by two speakers who will share a bit about their work. We have Ms. Bianca Perez, Head of Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Office and Co-Chief Resilience Officer in Quezon City in the Philippines. Bianca has over a decade of experience in disaster risk management in the Philippines and internationally, with a focus on emergency response, risk assessment, local governance, and resilience building, very much in our city's wheelhouse. As head of Quezon City's DRR office, she leads efforts to really design, implement programs that build disaster resilient communities. We're also really lucky to be joined by Natalia Romero, who is a disaster risk management specialist from the World Bank. She co-leads the Resilient Infrastructure thematic area at the bank's Global Facility for Disaster Reduction and Recovery. With over 14 years of experience applying her engineering and systems analysis knowledge to energy, transport, water, and health, she specializes in managing uncertainty in decision-making for infrastructure. I'll serve as your moderator for today's session. Again, I'm Eskedar Gessesse. I'm a program lead for Resilient Cities Network Urban Power Program, where we focus on building energy resilience across cities. My professional background is on energy access and power infrastructure resilience, and this topic is very near and dear to my heart. So I'm very excited to get to be part of this today's discussion. I'll start with a brief introductory presentation on how our cities thinks about energy resilience and how we support our member cities to advance their overall urban resilience. And then I'll pass on the mic to our wonderful speakers before we open the floor to audience questions. Let me share my slide now. All right. So, as many of you already know, our energy systems are facing increasing threats from climate change-induced extreme weather events to many geopolitical instabilities that impact fuel supplies and really even directly damage infrastructure. The initial damages of these events are really quite severe, as we've seen in many parts of the world. But the real crisis sometimes begins afterwards, when the power goes out. Hospitals lose their power, communication networks fail, water treatment plants stop working, and so on and so forth. These cascading failures can turn a disaster into a really full-blown humanitarian crisis. What this tells us is that cities' energy systems are more than just a utility. They're really at the very foundation of disaster response. Before we move ahead too much, let's get these terms straight. So what do we mean by urban energy resilience, and what do we mean by disaster risk reduction? I know for many of you, this will be quite familiar. In a holistic sense, urban energy resilience is a city's capacity to ensure safe, reliable, and clean energy access for all, especially in the face of growing challenges and extreme weather events. Rapid urbanizations and all of those growing challenges that cities are experiencing. It is also a city's ability to really anticipate, withstand, and recover from various shocks and stresses. Um, More like a kind of the other side of the coin, we can think of it in that sense. Disaster risk reduction is looking at is a systemic approach to assess and manage the causes of these disasters to reduce their likelihood and their potential impact. It involves preventing new risks and reducing existing ones, really ultimately trying to drive cities and many governments around the world to build resilience and really contribute to a sustainable development. Um, Unfortunately, we're really at a time of what we're typically have been referring to as a polycrisis, where cities are experiencing multiple shocks and stresses at the same time, which is really truly testing their resilience. To make matters worse, power is really critical service needed for effective disaster response and recovery. However, these shocks, like winds, storms, flooding, what have you, can really severely damage the energy infrastructure. Even events like heat waves can put additional pressure on the power system, leading it to a potential failure. Um, if these events really end up leading to a power outage, it could really amplify the impact. Power failures could really be a matter of life and death in some situations, and really can have a severe can cause a severe economic burden. Let's take a look at a recent example from the US. In 2021 winter storm in Texas left really many millions of people without power, freezing and in the dark. The effects of the cascading effects on services that really rely on this power, like water treatment, medical services, were severely impacted. And this really resulted in close to 250 people dying primarily from hypothermia. There was also a huge economic loss associated with this event. In the same state, only a few years later, in 2024, a hurricane led to a prolonged power outage because it really knocked the transmission and distribution lines. And then this event was unfortunately followed by days with really high temperatures and humidity that put vulnerable communities, especially those elderly, at high risk. There was severe food shortage because people really struggled to keep their foods in their fridges. There was a high demand for cooling, and then hospitals were crowded because of the impacts of both of these series of events. This puts even more pressure on the disaster response teams. Unfortunately, many of the climate projections what are telling us is that the frequency of these events will likely increase, which calls for greater attention for planning and investment to build resilient systems. It is with this knowledge in mind, as well as recognizing that cities are really trying to be at the front line of the global energy transition, that our urban power program was born. Urban Power is Resilient Cities Network program that is designed to help cities build sustainable, people-centered, and resilient energy systems. There's multiple components of the program, depending on what cities particularly need. We provide tools and assessment approaches that help cities uncover their biggest challenges and gaps in priorities. We also co-design solutions that are meant to yield multiple resilience benefits that help cities tackle not just their energy challenges, but all those that they're regularly experiencing. We're also we also provide feasibility assessment support, I should say, to turn plans into actions. And then all of this is all by also providing capacity building or creating capacity building opportunities and knowledge exchange opportunities for cities to really continue in their efforts. So, as part of that tool building or offering an engagement tool to help cities understand where they are in their resilience building is where the city energy resilience framework comes in. Over the next few slides, I'll walk you through kind of the big ideas behind the framework, its direct connection with disaster risk reduction, and then how we've applied it in a handful of cities around the world that are in this journey. The city energy resilience framework at its core is an engagement tool. It's designed to guide cities in applying a resilience lens to their energy system and work towards their energy transition and urban resilience goals. There are multiple elements incorporated within this framework, including energy infrastructure resilience, energy transition, equitable access to public services, and effective emergency management. As I mentioned, it's essentially an engagement tool, and with that, we have also developed a discussion guide that really translates the various components of the framework into questions and best practices that cities can follow to really understand where their biggest gaps and priorities are. This graphic in front of you is basically the framework in its entirety. Don't worry, you don't have to read anything within it. You'll be able to access the framework by going to our website. But generally speaking, if you notice the outer circle of this wheel, that's the meat of the framework, which is the 48 sets of goals or pathways designed for cities to jumpstart their resilience building and really understand where the biggest areas for improvement are. They're categorized across different levers that cities can use or within their scope of influence or within their scope of control, so that they really bring in multiple stakeholders to ultimately build a resilient city that really serves their people or urban residents. I want to emphasize that this framework is grounded in global best practices, but it's really designed to help cities assess their own local policies and infrastructure plans. This slide here presents to you some of the core principles or the 4 core principles of the framework. And this really defined kind of the main ideas behind this tool. I'll walk you through all 4. The first core principle is equity-centered, or meaning it's a way for cities to think about how to provide equitable access to clean, safe, and affordable energy, and ensuring that vulnerable communities are part of the decision-making process. The second principle is risk-aware, which is understanding that an energy system's risk and vulnerabilities and leveraging data and technology to use that to inform our governance planning and design and operations. The third piece is systems enabled. We recognize that energy system doesn't exist in a silo. In fact, it's actually an enabler of many urban interconnected systems, and thus recognizing and prioritizing solutions that leverage the intersectionality of these urban systems to not just understand the vulnerabilities, but really use them as a way as opportunities to drive resilience across all the urban systems. Lastly, it's the ecology-focused piece. This is recognizing that cities are really trying to accelerate and transform their economies through clean energy solutions that address the climate crisis, and then balancing human life and the built and natural environment. This slide here, as I mentioned, there's many different components across the 48 goals covered across the framework itself. But these are I would like to highlight a few of these elements that directly link the resilience element with the disaster management aspect. The CERF, the City Energy Resilience Framework, it emphasizes that an integrated and adaptive planning requires continuous dialogue and integration across key urban systems, ensuring that diverse perspectives from public, private, and community sectors are heard and incorporated, ultimately leading us to a truly holistic and people-centered approach. The framework also encourages continuous engagement with local communities and stakeholders to make sure that energy and disaster management plans are inclusive and responsive to community needs. Another important element is the need for infrastructure planning and financing to be streamlined across sectors and really informed by the latest and greatest climate data. This ensures that our financing models for resilient infrastructure are realistic, but they also account for the changes we expect to see. Lastly, the CERF includes goals on co-developing disaster plans with communities themselves. Ultimately, this is to ensure that our preparedness, response, and recovery processes are not only effective, but also tailored to the unique vulnerabilities of the various urban communities that reside in that area. So who over the next couple only have a couple of slides left. So as I mentioned, this tool at its core is an engagement tool, and we at Resilient Cities have been partnering with multiple cities across different parts of the world to conduct an assessment based and informed by the framework. The workshops or the CERF workshops bring a wide range of stakeholders from within city government, energy institutions, community organizations, and different types of technical and funding partners that directly work with the city itself to understand and conduct a holistic assessment of the city's progress towards meeting these sets of goals contained within the framework. Together with these cities, we've assessed gaps and priorities, and I really identified areas that need improvement. You see in the map here to understand which cities we've been collaborating with, and you're also you can read more about this work by going to our website. The results of these workshops, they looked different in different parts of the world, but ultimately led to using to informing those energy resilience gaps identified as part of this work as a starting point for further work. So the most recent city energy resilience workshop we conducted was in Quezon City only last month in July of this year, where we, in keeping with the main essence of this type of engagement, we brought together a diverse set of stakeholders, directly or indirectly linked to managing the city's energy system, but at the same time also responsible for disaster response and recovery. Within this context, basically what the city did, what the CERF did is it's in this context is increasing the climate related, helping cities connect energy resilience, mitigation efforts, and disaster management, really considering infrastructure risk and interdependencies, ultimately to help the city examine its opportunities. The circle you see in the right hand corner is the main results from that assessment, which basically told the city where the biggest gaps and potential areas for investment could be over the next few years. So I won't spoil it too much because we'll actually hear from Miss Bianca in a little bit the biggest learnings and takeaways from that workshop. But at the same time, also really we get to see what really cities on the front line means, how cities are responding to disasters, and how are they thinking about incorporating energy resilience as part of their future planning processes. So I'll stop sharing with that. As I said, you could write to us, or you can also go to our website to learn a bit more about the framework. So Ms. Bianca, I would like to invite you to the floor. Or I'll pass on the mic, I should say. So you can tell us a bit about Quezon City.
Hi, Eskedar. So, good evening, everyone. So, let me share with you what we have been doing for Quezon City. So, all right. So, taking off the initial presentation, I'll share with you the experience of Quezon City and applying the assessment tool for energy resilience in the city of Quezon and the Philippines. So, just to give you a quick overview of of where Quezon City is in the Philippines. So we are the largest city in the entire country. In the national capital region, we are one fourth. And in terms of population, since we are the largest in the country, we have over 3.3 million residents, and we are covering 17,170 hectares. In a year, the various hazards that we are facing are include tropical cyclones, extreme rainfall, earthquakes, urban fire, and even landslides. And if in the Philippines we experience an average of 20 tropical cyclones that enter the Philippine area of responsibility, 9 to 12 of these directly or indirectly affect our city in an annual basis. And based on projections for precipitation, we anticipate in the next 15 years that our rainfall will get even more intense and more frequent. So there's an increase of 4.56% in maximum daily rainfall amount. And just to let you know, just last month, between in 6 days on July 19 to 2021, we actually experienced an extreme rainfall event in Quezon City, wherein we had to evacuate 10,000 families. And in this period of time, in 6 days on July 19 to 21, we were 24, 19 to 24, we experienced a month's worth of rain in just 6 days. So that just makes really the our actions for anticipatory and preparedness against disasters more urgent during this time. And on top of that, we also experience an average of 100 residential fires. And we are also traversed by the West Valley Fault, wherein we project that the worst case scenario can affect 3 million of our residents, and we would be experiencing large amounts of damages and losses in the entire city. So, um, how are we then organized to prepare for such disasters and the effects of climate change? So, in the city, we are enabled by two major laws for disaster risk reduction and management and climate change. So, first is that we have the Republic Act of 10121. So, this is the national law which establishes the DRM framework in the country, and we also have the Republic Act 9729, which is the Climate Change Act of um of 2009 in the Philippines. And this establishes that climate change has to be mainstream in all of government policies and actions. So with these two enabling laws, what Quezon City did is that we created the it established two specific local special bodies consisting of departments and offices working together towards shared vision of a resilient future ready city. So the first of it, first local special body is the Quezon City Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council. It consists of 47 council members with mayor as the chair and the action officer as the Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Office. So this local special body is in charge of setting the direction, development, and implementation of DRM programs in the city. And to twin that local dream council, we also have a local special body, which we call as a local climate change council. Consists of 23 council members with the mayor chairing it. And I have not just indicated here, but the action officer here, or also the vice chairperson, is the city's climate change and environmental sustainability department. So it is crucial to note that in Quezon City, not only do we have two local special bodies that focuses on disaster risk reduction and management, and we also have another local special body that focuses on the goals of the city for climate change. And not only that, we have these local special bodies that work together towards our shared vision. We also have institutionalized offices dedicated to these goals. So the DRM office for the DRM goals of the city and Climate Change and Environmental Sustainability Department for the climate action goals of the city, which I suppose and I think I am proud of that the Climate Change and Environmental Sustainability Department is the first across across the country to we I think we are the first city to have established such office to focus on implementing our local climate change action plan. And how we work together is basically when we look at climate action, we look at mitigation and adaptation goals. And the climate change office, well, the climate change office is focused on the mitigation goals of the city to mitigate the impacts of climate change. The adaptation goals of the city um, is um, is overseen by our office in the disaster in the Quezon City DRM office. So that's how these two offices and dedicated departments work together, and also within the local special bodies that we are also um, that we also belong and steer within the city government. And with this enabling institutional arrangement, we are then able to focus on interventions that for mitigation and adaptation goals. So just to provide you us also additional context, what we are preparing for in terms of mitigation and adaptation. But for DRMO, these are what we are anticipating in the future. So as I mentioned, we are facing the worst case scenario in Quezon City for earthquake, since we are traversed by the West Valley Fault. A study by the Japan International Cooperation Agency in 2004 projected that a worst case scenario might occur in the near future, wherein half of our population would possibly be displaced, and we would experience as high as 12,000 possibly fatalities across the city, and that we would also have incurred law injuries for 104,000 of our population. And on the other side of it, we also have the worst case flooding scenario in the city, wherein we would have to activate at least 80 evacuation centers in a widespread flooding for the city. And those that would be affected by the flooding are multipurpose halls, various government facilities such as health centers, fire stations, hospitals, police stations, and such. We are also anticipating and anticipate 380,000 displaced population in the worst case scenario of flooding in the city. And all these two worst case scenarios, which are actually part of our disaster risk assessment, anticipate that all of the facilities that might be affected here by these two hazards might suffer power losses or power outages. And we also anticipate that this area of concern would not just affect the operations within this government facility, but the operations and the normal living condition of all the residents in our city. So with these two hazards, they we are just two of these two hazards. The local DRM office is working with the Climate Change and Environmental Sustainability Department towards increasing our resilience as a whole for a city. And for this particular sector, the energy resilience for the city government. And these are some of the interventions that we have already existing. Um, so we right now we see we see the energy systems in our city in just one component for emergency response. So since we have this worst case scenario and the DRM office is in charge of adaptation practices and interventions, we have identified response activities to anticipate the power loss scenario. So we have devised various contingency strategies to that in which we focus on installation and maintaining alternative power supplies in case such disasters happen. And we have also established coordination mechanisms with the utility providers. So, for example, in Quezon City, um, we are quite dependent on the energy distributor company that provides power for the city. So we have established a system of coordination with them in case of power loss in the city. We have also prepositioned manual tools across the various barangays of the city. We have 142 barangays. Barangays are the smallest political unit in the country, and they have their own jurisdictions and autonomy within their own area. So as the city government, we empower these barangays, these small towns, so that they can also be able to set aside and establish their own continuity strategies in terms of power loss. So that may also include manual tools or generator sets. We have also continued to provide go bags and empowered our residents to have their own power sources through educating our residents into building their own go bags. And we also have a task force or a local special body dedicated to fix the wires, dangling wires that that provide power, that are conduits to power across the city, that also sometimes lead to fire incidents in the city. And then in green fund, the solarization of schools, solar powered AWS, automated weather stations, electric ambulances, and the Quezon City Green Building Code are some of the interventions that are led by our climate change and environmental sustainability department in terms of solar energy deployment, and the promotion of um, alternative alternative energy sources in the city. So the interventions that we have are really two pronged in approach. We always look at the possible adaptation practices and activities that the DRMO can take a lead on. So it's mostly disaster preparedness and disaster response, while the climate change and environmental sustainability department is focused on looking at mitigating options, at looking at solar energy and alternative power sources for the city and providing green jobs. This we also have established an early warning system that builds on data sharing at the barangay level, and at the city level it makes use of digital tools and equipment such as sensors, weather stations, sirens, and making sure that our communities know what the information know and understand the information that we generate from this equipment and act on this information. So this is really the establishment of an early warning system that is based on data, that is based on the actual generated um, weather information we get from our sensors, and builds on the institutional knowledge of the communities to act on these advisories and warnings from our technology. So we call this early warning system as I Rise Up, or the Intelligent Resilient Integrated Systems for the Urban Population. This system is also what enables us to connect with the utility providers, and also provides feedback to the city government for any instance or situation of power loss in the city. So this is also a feedback mechanism for the city government, so that we have real-time information from the ground on what the residents are experiencing during an extreme incident. We also have the Quezon City Green Awards. So this is a project in collaboration with the Climate Change and Environmental Sustainability Department, wherein we recognize best practices across the city in terms of adaptation or resilient practices or mitigation actions or green practices. So we recognize and incentivize youth, barangays, businesses, schools, youth leaders, and uh, civil society organizations so that they become local champions in their own way. And actually, one project that we saw here, one best practice that we saw here is that and that we have determined that it's actually significant in our goals for building resilience in the energy sector is that there is one project by one barangay wherein they subsidize electrification for the residents, and as you can see, and by doing that, they decrease the number of illegal connections within the barangay, and that actually decreases the number of fire incidents in the area. So, through the Green Awards, we are able to identify and recognize and even appreciate and promote these best practices across different sectors and stakeholders in the city so that they may become local champions within their own areas. Now, what we saw during the surf workshop is that this is actually what I'm showing you is the main takeaway from the assessment that Quezon City did in applying the surf framework to our current systems. So we saw across the four dimensions: systems, people, resources, and governance, the areas of concern and improvement that we should move forward to and prioritize across the city. So in Quezon City, we saw that there are high priorities that we have identified in building our people, in building information and the human capacities, whether residents or resident civilians or government personnel or the private sector. We saw that although we have really good we have really good focus already on marginalized sectors, there are still areas of improvement in terms of expanding access to to green job opportunities, and that we have to establish clear distinctions for funding for climate resilience and general energy programs. At the same time, we also saw strengths and also shortcomings and things and gaps that we have to improve across systems, resources, and governance in terms of energy resilience in the city. So moving forward, what Quezon City learned from this exercise is that there are strengths that we can play with, particularly in governance and leadership for disaster risk reduction and climate action. But we have also seen areas of improvements in terms of people, building people's capacities, and and in terms of prepositioning and allocating our resources well, to build energy resilience. So this really helped us, and this is the workshop wherein we had this assessment was actually timely for us since we are in the process of updating our local DRM plan for the city in the next that would program our funding and projects for the next couple of years. So what we are doing is that we are now reshifting our priorities and putting in programs where we see that we can build on our strengths and address the gaps that we have seen from the surf workshop that we have just completed last year, last month. So taking off from that, I'm going to return this to the floor so that yeah,
Thank you
we
so
can
much.
now return to the agenda,
That
to the
was
matter
really
at hand. All right.
I really enjoyed learning about Quezon City's already really impressive approach and collaborative governance for tackling disaster management and building resilience from communication, but also your very self-critical approach to also understanding, okay, we have these strengths, but these are our areas for improvement. So how can we better shape this forward? So I really appreciate that. So without further ado, now I'll pass the mic on to Natalia Romero, who'll zoom out a little bit to tell us a little bit about her work on resilience infrastructure, or particularly infrastructure, resilient energy infrastructure from her experience collaborating with different governments around the world. Over to you, Natalia.
Thank you, Eskedar. I just want to confirm that you can hear me well right now.
Yes.
Perfect. So good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. Yes, I'm going to focus. It's a little bit of a shift where I sit in the Global Facility for Disaster Reduction and Recovery. We're more focused on the part of like bringing the tool solutions that are there available to work also with energy specialists and our energy clients in the World Bank on how do we mainstream resilience, how do we bring those concepts of disaster risk management into that decision making. So this is, you're going to see that a lot of like kind of that audience and some of this concept is more on that energy sector, but seeing the presentation from Eskedar and Bianca, of course, and also from the experience also with working with cities and resilience, you'll see that like there is a lot of linkage and points where there is that opportunity of connecting the two, I would say, approaches. So the energy infrastructure is vulnerable to disasters. The information in this slide comes from a report that was published by the World Bank in 2019, is the Lifelines report. The figure shows GDP of countries and US states and the share of power power outages that are due to natural shocks. And so something to look at this is that there's several countries where like more than 50% of those outages were related to the natural shocks. So it is something to consider and something important in the aspect of like that resilience, reliability of the energy delivery, electricity delivery. In the same report, there's a focus on, well, if we have poor planning, if the infrastructure is aging and there's no practice of maintenance, that can have a greater impact, and that could be the context sometimes of low and middle income countries, not everywhere, and it also happens in other countries, in our settings. We do know that there is that frequency and intensity of some of these events that is intensified, is increasing. And also when we have a disaster that can affect, for example, more than one component, that can cause a cascading effect within the system, but then also can kind of affect all our essential services, and there is a socioeconomic impact. So when we look at the socioeconomic impact, I think this images says a lot, and it is about that kind of cascading disruptions. No, I wish I had a figure more related to energy. This is more related to roads, but I think it communicates very well that aspect of a road flooded that is causing damage to infrastructure, but it's also disrupting the day-by-day of the people, businesses, access to those businesses. So it's having other direct and indirect impacts. The same report, like there was a survey of firms that was also used to quantify some of how these disruptions of power systems have also disruptions on that and economic losses of firms, which I think is a very important message to consider, and is that in direct impacts, like in a year, 38 billion of reduced of utilization of those services, sales losses of 82 billion a year, and then to consider the coping mechanisms that those firms can invest in. The analysis focus on their potentially like having a backup generation, and that can cost up to 65 billion a year. Again, this was published in 2019, so we should be aware of the dates of this information. And there are also indirect impacts, right? We know that can have an impact of like potentially lack of that reliable electricity supply, potentially affect more some of the smaller and newer firms. There could be a bias or more labor-intensive production, maybe limited capacity of some goods and services when there's that disruption, and potentially also those businesses can have less capacity to also could be competitive in international markets. So, I mean, energy resilience matters. We're seeing this more from in the previous slide, more from the economic impact. But I mean, there's also important social aspects where I think it starts connecting a little bit more and more what we think about resilience and also in what cities are looking into in their prioritization, right? There is that aspect of electricity, as Eskedar mentioned, it's an important it's a service that supplies also a service to other essential services that are used by the society. That includes health facilities, emergency response, water supply, telecommunications. We went over the discussion on economic costs and economic losses, but that effect on businesses, of course, that also affect the livelihoods of people. Like there are people that use the products from that are through those supply chains or through those services. And then also, if there is electricity supply, can be used also during a shock and a response to an emergency. Cooling facilities, heating facilities, just providing those essential services would be, so that's very important for the resilience of the communities. And also having that electricity supplied can help also kind of reestablish and recover faster. In general, there's also that sense of that there's a public trust feeling also with that reliability of the service, which is overall good for the well-being of the society. Within those concepts, we approach in the World Bank a lot the interventions in resilient infrastructure. We're looking at that shift from thinking from maybe an asset resilience to a system level resilience, and that means that it is. I mean, there are some interventions that help us reduce damage to a specific assets, but we need to look also at solutions that think about more holistically at the service delivery level, and even beyond that, looking at in the moment of an event, what are those vulnerable communities, and how can those vulnerable communities could be receiving that service or affected by that disruption the least. So they are not also, I mean, there's not that compound effect of the effect from the shock to them. And so we emphasize that the solutions and resilience should be looking within that framework, within that impact level, and thinking about the communities and thinking about that benefit for the communities, which resonates a lot with like how cities also think about or prioritize investments in resilience. So some of the concepts that we're really looking at, like when we mainstream resilience and the focus of energy systems in particular, there is this aspect of access to information for improved decision making, particularly in the context of energy. The energy sector is really driven by reliability. That means there is a high focus on basically minimizing disruptions, planning methods, identification of technologies to minimize those disruptions. And so a lot of sometimes our focus is in looking at like how, and then also from our stakeholders working in this sector, is how do we bring those aspects of understanding of the uncertainty and those extreme events also within that framework of the planning and the prioritization of investments in the energy sector. We highlight a lot that the solutions should be thought throughout the life cycle of the infrastructure and also along a continuum. This is more related to the concepts of resilience, and it is very easy sometimes to default to think about the capital investment or reinforcing assets. And the reality is that, I mean, and also as promoted within the framework in the city's resilient network, and also what Bianca presented, is that we do need to think about from planning, design, infrastructure delivery, operation and maintenance considerations, also that part of the business continuity, within the operator itself, and potentially also the business. I saw Bianca referring to the business continuity of the city too, right? And so there's that part of that coordination between the two sides, but it's thinking, and then also the commission and potentially the infrastructure and like kind of the rebuilding. There are measures that can be considered along that infrastructure life cycle. And within the resilience continuum, that means measures that we focus on the potentially the preparedness, mitigation, response, and recovery. For example, in the case of a good example of like kind of where we fit something like this is potentially consider having more of a material to be able to restore, to replace, for example, poles that can be down for certain events, right? And that capacity would respond quickly to those events, in contrast to potentially reinforcing more of the construction side of those components. Then decision-making tools, information, and all the solutions, of course, need that capacity building to use it, and also in that preparedness and response, and in the context of energy to maintain that reliability and that stability they're really important. And I'll mention an example from some event we had about how maintaining that reliability and stability of like some of that electricity supply requires also that capacity, that technical capacity, to be able to mitigate the cascading effects. And sometimes, of course, there is a need to think about policy reforms, changes of standards, and there's always that need in resilience of that institutional strengthening, which in the context of cities, I see that the Bianca emphasized a lot, like that city role of like connecting also across different sectors, and that collaboration is really important for both for the side of the response, but also in terms of the coordination of the investments and what investments are more relevant also for the city, considering the resilience benefits. So here I'm going to list some highlights of some the improved decision-making examples. These all are some key messages that came from an event we organized. It was about 2 years ago. It's called the Utilities Knowledge Exchange Program, focused on energy resilience. And we had speakers from across the world. They were more focused on the national level of stakeholders of energy, I must say, but a lot of the concepts will resonate, and they actually resonate with some of what Bianca mentioned from Kansas City. So there are tools, for example, of like starting some more preliminary assessments to identify, and same of city resilience, identifying some areas where potentially we have more hazard exposure, we have more vulnerable communities, or we have some assets that potentially are more critical to maintain that service delivery. And so like they can be used already to prioritize some investments and some solutions. There are a lot of methodologies also to think about more of like more detailed risk assessments and data collection to inform the risk assessments. There actually recently there's a lot of information compiled and like shared publicly on the whole scope of energy resilience from EPRI and the Climate Ready Framework, which is definitely a very robust compilation of resources. Not the only one, but very good one. Also, we emphasize that like there's a prioritization of the investments and identifying solutions. And also for this, like thinking a lot more about what is the right technology, what is the right methodology that really is applicable to the risk. And here I can mention an example from, we have some presentations in this event. There's a presentation of like some modeling done for some, actually this is an avalanche risk that Tajikistan, fertility in Tajikistan that serves communities that are in the rural areas. And then it was very important that like that disruption doesn't happen. And so there's a very detailed technology solution there and modeling to minimize that risk. Other solution, for example, that I think is actually similar to some of the early warning systems that we just learned about is there is a speaker from Japan shares some of what is done, I think, on communicating with communities too. So similarly to receive from communities, for example, information and when there are outages from the utility side, they wanted to know that. And also if there is a for example, like some vegetation control needs, so vegetation is getting into some of the lines, to also have more preventive maintenance. Then there is also focus on, for example, that we also want to think about risk management within also the operational decision making. And then there was a focus on transmission operator, I think, in Colombia, looking at like risk metrics and how they start realizing that extreme events were affecting more and more. And then like, what do we need to do to start tracking our progress towards that? And then also sometimes, again, like there is a consideration for improve the standards, and also some example, for example, of risk pooling, connecting potentially in the case of cities with lower cities to respond, to be able to kind of support each other in the response of emergencies or regions, or having like some of like a shared backup supplies to recover quickly. I think, yeah, this will be my last slide because this is just general concepts. And I know we're running out of time. So with this, thank you very much for having me today.
Thank you so much, Natalia. That was really informative and really great information to really hear like the practicalities of what it really means to integrate resilience as part of infrastructure investment. We have a 1 minute officially, but if that's okay with our audience, we can run maybe 3 or 4 minutes over. I do want to pose a couple of questions that came out from the chat, and I'll pose it to both of you. Feel free to take whichever one, but I think they're really great and they connect directly to what you already presented. How much, and this one is particularly for Bianca, how much is all of this preparedness and recovery program costing? And then question to both of you is, how are insurance companies regarding this investment, and what could be the predicted savings for the national economy? I know they're tough questions, but feel free to kind of reflect based on your experiences. I'll open it to Bianca first.
In terms of cost for preparedness and recovery program costing, by law, all local government units or cities in the country are required to allot 5% of their annual budget to their RM and climate action activities. So you have that every year, 5% of our budget goes to it. In terms of how our insurance companies regarding this investment, yeah, I would defer that question to maybe Eskedar or Natalia, but for Quezon City, our buildings and facilities are insured, but right now we are still examining risk transfer mechanisms and how we can possibly involve insurance companies on this recovery and preparedness costing. But most of the interventions that we have are really city led and community based. So that I'll defer to the others to answer for the last question, though.
Natalia, go for it.
Thank you, Eskedar. Actually, I mean, this whole work more on like kind of the solution of insurance is something that we're just studying to get into. And I think it also depends from the energy side is like, what is the type of the type of utility, like kind of the size, the risk level. And I think one of the examples that I mentioned, for example, in the Caribbean, it was more focused on the risk pooling, for example, mechanisms, because if not, the very small focus on that part of the insurance. So definitely, I think something to learn more. But I think in the context of the city's energy and resilience, that's a very specific questions and for us to learn more about, explore.
Yep. Thank you so much. If I was to add a little bit on the insurance aspect, I think this is an area of work, particularly for resilience, that is developing even more as we get more data, better data. But at the same time, there's also good practices helping us consider these conversations at the design stage before we go into project implementation, which is really fully recognizing and allocating risk to the different parties that will be responsible to different elements of the infrastructure itself. So this is where the conversation of the insurance comes in, but ultimately this is still an area that's still being developed for many parts, and it will look different for cities. One last question before we close. How do cities navigate around the heavily regulated energy sector, and how are cities making investment case for energy resilience and preparedness? And I think, Bianca, you can take this one. You're muted.
I think where the local government unit can really step in are really in terms of governance. We can, through city ordinances, we can really establish enabling policy to incentivize or even penalize non-compliant industries. So, for example, we have the Green Building Code that we have just adopted and passed through the city council. It basically incentivizes and would in the near future require all buildings that would be built to that would be moving towards the energy goals of the city. So a part of our green building code is really to incentivize residents, commercial buildings to have solar rely on solar energy. And based on our studies, once we have that established for the entire city, and that would be a requirement, residents will be able to save a third to half of their usual electric bills. So, they're based on the baseline assessment that we have conducted. There are really good benefits in ahead for our residents. So it's really just a matter of setting up the enabling policy for the city and regulating the existing industries that we have, um, and also promoting green jobs towards this industries, opening up the opportunities for the marginalized. So, and facilitating the conversations between the stakeholders to also hear what the areas of concern they have and how best that the city can help. So the city can be that conduit for that conversation, and we can also be the developers of policy to lead change within the city. So I think that, yeah, that's how I can see that LGU can really contribute to for this change that we are aiming for.
Thank you so much. I think that's a really powerful end to help us close this really wonderful session. Thank you so much to both of you. I personally learned a lot, and I hope our audience did as well. Thanks to everybody for staying 6 minutes past the hour. But before I let you go, I do want to mention that we have our following Cities on the Frontline session on September 18th on building community resilience. So please join us, register, and hopefully we'll see you in a month. Thank you so much again, Bianca and Natalia, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thanks everybody for joining us today.